For the first 4 games and 12 years of its existence, The Legend of Zelda was flat. Ocarina of Time rocketed the series into the third dimension, making use of up in both its sweeping overworld landscapes and its puzzle box dungeons. I mean, hell, the very first thing you do in the very first dungeon is climb to the tip top of a gigantic tree and then hurl yourself off a cliff, plummeting deep into an underground lake. That shiny new Y-axis was definitely meant to be the star player, and it's at least in the top 3 axes for sure. So it's worth exploring the relationship that pro players have developed with verticality, and the clever strategies and glitches they've employed to traverse the highs and lows of Hyrule as efficiently as possible. Real quick before we get into it, for those of you who've been on my channel for a while, you might have noticed that I'm not posting lots of Zelda speedrunning strategies and setups anymore, instead doing more long-form content like this. My plan for this channel going forward is to continue with more of that, but of course I haven't stopped working on speedrunning stuff. If you like seeing the discovery and optimization process behind the scenes, check out my new secondary channel, Danny B Strats, and that's where I'll post those sorts of videos from now on. And if you're new here and you end up liking this video, consider subscribing. It's free and it would really help me out as I try to grow this channel with more consistent, high-quality videos for the future. Okay, let's start out with Link's natural jumping and climbing abilities. Now, adult Link is right around 64 in-game units tall to the tip of his cap. We know he's kind of short for an adult human man, so if we estimate his height at around 5'4", that gives us a conversion rate of 1 in-game unit to 1 inch, or 2.54 centimeters. When you run off a ledge at full speed, Link will do a big jump that goes 29.25 units into the air. By sheer weird coincidence, that's exactly the average jump height reported by the NBA across over 1,000 of their players. That's about a 2.5-foot vertical jump. So Link is an athletic guy, and more importantly, he's a realistic athletic guy. Link has a few other jumping abilities too, like side hops and backflips, which go 6.75 and 21 units high, respectively. One of the most common ways to gain height that speedrunners use is based on the backflip and uses a technique called hovering. Now that has nothing to do with hover boots, but it refers to a cool glitch that allows you to stick in the air. After performing a glitch called ISG, the infinite sword glitch, Link will be in a state where his sword is considered to be swinging on every frame. While that sword hitbox remains active, Link will be unable to fall off ledges, and if the floor were to suddenly disappear beneath him, he would just remain hovering in place. Also, while ISG is active, if you do happen to find yourself airborne, such as from a backflip, shielding damage while midair will ground you, sticking you in place. So with mobile and controllable damage sources like bombs and bomb shoes, we can incrementally, 21 units at a time, climb up into the air for as long as we have explosives. Now those of you familiar with Wind Waker speedruns will know of another kind of hovering that can be used to gain height in that game: zombie hovering. By mashing a jump slash after death, Link can repeatedly initiate that animation, gaining a tiny amount of height each time. You're fighting gravity at the same time though, and so if you don't press it rapidly enough, gravity wins, and you descend more quickly than you can gain height. A little known fact is that Ocarina of Time actually has its own zombie hovering, discovered a decade after its Wind Waker counterpart and affectionately named after it, despite not always requiring Link to die in this game. By performing a special combination of moves involving casting Din's Fire immediately after a spin attack, we can allow Link to get damage cancelled out of certain mini cutscenes or text boxes. One of these is the opening of treasure chests, which preserves some of the properties Link has during the opening cutscene. A consequence of this is that if Link then dies while midair, he can do backflips or side hops repeatedly to gain little bits of height each time. The result is basically identical to the Wind Waker's version, although it's much easier to stay aloft. It can be used to skip past the Fire, Spirit, and Shadow Temple boss doors, but it's generally not useful outside of very niche challenges. Turning down the complexity knob a few hundred notches for a second, Link can also just straight up climb nearly vertical edges of walls in certain places, using a technique we call seam walking. There are 3 kinds of map collision: floors, walls, and ceilings, determined entirely by their angle to the horizontal. You might think that floors are the only ones that Link is allowed to stand on, but walls are allowed to act as floors in that regard under certain circumstances. What are those circumstances? Well, every frame, Link checks for nearby walls as collision candidates. He does that by sending out rays exactly north, south, east, and west, and from a point centered at his waist. If a wall is not detected on a given frame by those rays, then Link won't collide with it as a wall, and it is under these conditions that this wall would be allowed to act as a floor for Link. This means that if we're near the very top of a slanted wall, so that the detection rays peek out a little over the top of the wall, we can stand on it. My guess for why they did this is so that Link has a little bit of platforming leeway when traversing areas that have sloped walls fanning out from the edge of a floor. It might feel clunky or unexpected for the slightest touch of an adjoining wall to shove the player off a ledge, so this allows things to feel a little bit smoother and more lenient. This mechanic has an unintended consequence, though. What if a wall is naturally aligned to the compass directions, and you go to its side edge? The detection rays will skirt by it on both sides, leaving it undetected despite us being right up against it. This setup meets the conditions for this wall to be allowed to act as a floor, and so Link is able to stand right on the side of it, too. So for any wall which is aligned with the cardinal directions, and which has a non-vertical side edge, Link should just be able to walk right up that edge. Speedrunners use this in many places, like traversing the Hyrule Castle area more quickly, clipping past the closed door to Shadow Temple, or collecting this gold Skulltula. Now, seam walking is cool, when it's possible, but of course it isn't always possible. It requires some pretty specific geometry, and that geometry has to be oriented properly relative to the coordinate system too. We're honestly lucky that we can make use of it in as many places as we do. I mean, what the fuck? That was a hookshot jump, and it's one of the most effective and versatile ways to gain height in the game. All you need to do is hookshot something, and get interrupted on the frame that the hookshot makes contact with the thing that you grapple towards. That interruption can be a delayed gold Skulltula token like I just showed, death, or other glitches that mess with Link's animations. So how does it work? When the hookshot finishes pulling you towards something, it does one final correction to put you into the right spot relative to the thing you hooked. It calculates the difference in height between the hook on your extended arm and your body's height as determined from Link's coordinates near his feet. Link is then moved into a position based on this difference, with a larger difference from having aimed more directly upwards, leading to a larger movement. When the hookshot connection is interrupted, the hook retracts fully, triggering this process prematurely, and Link is granted a large upward shift. This shift becomes an upward velocity, and you get more of it the higher up you were aiming when you got interrupted. Hookshot jumps are commonly used in speedruns to reach Shadow Temple early, grab the heart piece on the arch in Desert Colossus, reach the Fire Arrow platform in Lake Hylia, and scale to the top of Dodongo's Cavern from the bottom. Now there's a secret obscure way to make hookshot jumps go even higher too, and I mean a lot higher. Gravity in this game works by subtracting a constant amount from your vertical velocity on every frame. If you have positive upward speed, eventually that will become negative due to gravity, and then it will bottom out at the terminal falling velocity of -20. The interesting thing is that gravity's pull isn't constant in Hyrule and can be manipulated by wearing different boots. Take that, Galileo. While wearing Kokiri boots, gravity is set to 1, meaning your velocity is reduced by 1 every frame when airborne. While wearing iron boots, it's 1.6, so you accelerate downwards 60% faster. But while wearing iron boots underwater, your gravity is reduced all the way down to 0.2. This gives the effect of falling so slowly when sinking through water. So with what effectively amounts to lunar gravity acting on us, what if we were to do a hookshot jump? Dying due to drowning is an effective hookshot interruption, and so we might expect that because of the reduced gravity, our upward velocity will decay 80% more slowly than if we were wearing Kokiri boots. And, well,
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And speaking of well, here's one. And hiding inside it is Hyrule's first manned vehicle and its flagship venture into orbit. There it is. Ain't she beautiful? So beautiful, in fact, let's make a copy. We'll do a glitch on this door to make the game consider us to be in a different room without unloading the one we're in like normal. In doing so, when we touch the transition plane leading to the room under the well, the chest down there loads a second time. The two copies being right on top of one another constantly attempt to displace one another upward, leading to an infinite chain reaction that sends Link back to Skyloft quicker than any other method in the game. And that's it. Is what I would have said if this video were made a few weeks ago. But a brand new glitch was discovered by Kydron that is unparalleled in its ability to send Link up or down, though unfortunately we haven't been able to find any speedrunning uses for it yet at all. We're calling it Choke Cancel, and it happens if Child Link attempts to use the hookshot after escaping from the choking state that Like-Likes put you in. By stunning a Like-Like at the same time as you get grabbed, you remain outside the enemy while getting choked. By mashing buttons to free yourself before the stun ends and you get spit out, you can leave the room and unload the Like-Like, preserving the choke state. This leads to some weird stuff, like the inability to take most forms of damage or to jump off ledges. But by far the weirdest is what happens if Child Link uses the hookshot. Normally, without the choke state, this causes a soft lock, where Link gets stuck because the hookshot tip doesn't load properly as Child. And that's still the case, but due to the persistent state of being grabbed by the Like-Like, now pulling the hookshot immediately puts you into the flying toward a hookshot target state, where all your speed is preserved forever in a Superman pose. Link is stuck like this, like stuck. At least with the normal soft lock, if you happen to be pointing at a loading zone, you could touch it and break the soft lock by transitioning maps. But while flying with the hookshot, all of Link's collision is entirely turned off, so absolutely nothing can stop him. Loading zones, damage, even void outs are nothing in the face of this glitch. In fact, this glitch is the only known way to sink below the global void boundary at negative 4,000 height, which normally always respawns you when you hit it. And through this, many of us learn that there exists a hard cap at negative 25,000 height, where Link just stops descending any further. But there is no such cap above the map. With this glitch, you can truly just rise into the sky forever, and nary a ceiling nor floor can say otherwise, until finally Link's coordinates become so large that the game just begs for mercy and crashes. So, those are the big ones. Techniques that speedrunners use, and may use in the near future, to reach the highest peaks and deepest valleys of OOT with maximum speed. But I've got some bonus content for the end of this video. In writing this script, I got curious. What are the highest peaks and deepest valleys in Hyrule? And what single map has the biggest difference in height between its lowest and highest points? So stick with me for a bit and let's dive into that last one first. A few obvious candidates come to mind for the map with the most height variation, like the Deku Tree. It's pretty tall. The highest point here is standing atop the compass chest on the 3rd floor all the way up at Y-coordinate 883, and the bottom of the deepest pit of the lower basement is at negative 1,960. All in all, that puts the Deku Tree at 2,843 units high, 237 feet tall if you follow our 1 unit equals 1 inch estimate, about 1.5 Statues of Liberty. Death Mountain is, well, a literal mountain. The lowest point, right at the entrance to Kakariko Village, is at 89 height, and the very lip of the crater is at 4,624, spanning 4,535 units, or about 378 feet, which is right around the height of the Eiffel Tower's 2nd platform. Maybe we need a rebrand to Death Hill? Fire Temple has a very vertical layout, with 2 giant spires of stacked rooms, with the ability to fall massive distances from the top to the bottom. You enter at height 0, and if you climb all the way to the top of those decorative torches near the Megaton Hammer Chest, you'll be at 4,840, putting you 403 feet off ground level, and making Fire Temple the tallest map in the game. Weirdly, the temple spans a larger height than the mountain which contains it. And that brings up an interesting point. OOT isn't an open world game. Each area exists on its own independent map, and so the relative sizes, geometries, and placements of maps which are meant to connect and intertwine in our imaginations don't really need to make any actual sense. For example, Gerudo Valley is really deep. Swimming in the water at the very bottom puts you lower than negative 3,000 height, and swimming further downstream, and therefore logically downhill, to Lake Hylia, sees you jump up 2,000 units, to only negative 1,000 in the next map. But what if OOT was remade as an open-world game today in 2024, and Hyrule was properly connected? What would be the highest and lowest points in that world, and how large a vertical range would the entire country span? And so, to answer this question, I decided to stitch together every separate zone in OOT, tracking their relative heights in the process. Now, some notes about methodology here. This is going to be guaranteed to not make any mathematical sense in some places. Some sequences of maps are connected circularly, and therefore already have discrepancies in-game. For example, Kokiri Forest and the Lost Woods have two different entrances between each other. On the Lost Woods side, those entrances are 200 units of height apart, but in Kokiri Forest, those same two entrances are 480 apart. Since the transitions are dark and foggy though, we can imagine there's some liminal space that Link traverses between the maps to account for those discrepancies. But at some transitions, there is a clear intent of continuity between the maps, like here at the entrance to Castletown where the drawbridge is visible on both sides, or here at the entrance to Death Mountain Crater, where they included the same staircase on both sides. For all transitions like this, I'll attempt to join the maps cleanly at the same height, and where possible, I'll do the same on dark transitions too, but if discrepancies arise, we may have to use our imaginations a bit to make Hyrule truly interconnected. Now it doesn't matter where our 0 point is, as long as we pick one and build everything off of that. So I picked the level of the floor in Link's treehouse, where we start the game, to be 0. To give you a quick feel for my process, let's join it to Kokiri Forest and the Deku Tree. The height of the floor in Link's house is actually 0 for in-game coordinates. You leave and appear at height 100, though, on the balcony. So we need to shift all of the forest down 100 units for continuity. This makes the entrance to the Deku Tree at negative 252. Inside the tree reports a height of 0 at the entrance, and so we need to lower the map by 252 units to match the outside. And so that puts the bottom of the tree at negative 2,212 units on our global scale, or roughly 14 stories underground. I continued just like this across the entirety of Hyrule, looking for the highest and lowest elevations across the entire game, and here's what I came up with. Standing at that peak of the Fire Temple puts you 8,130 units above the floor of Link's house, up 677 feet in elevation, the highest place in the country. Funny enough, we can compare this in an absolute sense now to the peak of Death Mountain, which is only 5,924 units high. So, if OOT were to be made open world without any changes, we should be able to see Fire Temple's spires jutting almost 200 feet up from within the volcano's crater. Now, the lowest point in the game world is also the elemental opposite of its highest. All of the waterways in the country eventually flow into Lake Hylia, and if we account for the valley-to-lake discrepancy that I mentioned earlier with some unseen interstitial hiking through the Gerudo foothills, then Lake Hylia is comfortably the lowest elevation in the overworld, and at its very bottom is the entrance to the Water Temple. And the entrance to the Water Temple is on its 3rd floor. This dungeon stretches deep into the lake bed, and all told, the very lowest point in the dungeon, and thus all of Hyrule, is the room beneath the central tower where Link is ambushed by enemies underwater. 3,429 units below Link's house. So that makes the difference between the lowest and highest elevations a total of 11,559 units, or about 963 feet. Less even than the height of most skyscrapers. Hyrule turned out flatter than I expected in the end. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, consider subscribing for more Zelda speedrunning content, and I'll see you next time.